Zanele Mokoena never thought her first time would be sold like cattle at an auction. She was only 19, a bright girl from a dusty township in South Africa, full of dreams too big for her tiny world. Her mother had scrubbed floors, her father had vanished before she was born, and Zanele had carried the weight of survival on her back since she was old enough to understand hunger. When she got the scholarship to study in London, the whole neighborhood celebrated. People said she was the lucky one, the girl who made it out, but no one ever asked what it cost to stay there. She lived in a shared flat with peeling walls and broken heaters. Her shoes had holes. She wore the same coat every day, and her phone screen had a long, jagged crack that never let her forget how poor she was. But she smiled through it. She believed her intelligence would be enough, until she met Mr. Calloway. It was a cold Thursday and she was walking home from the library, her stomach twisting from hunger and stress. He was standing by a sleek black car, dressed in a tailored suit, holding a black umbrella. He looked out of place on that grimy street, like something pulled out of a movie she wasn't invited to watch. "Zanele Mokoena?" he asked. She paused, startled. "Yes?" He handed her a card, black, smooth, with a single golden letter M embossed in the center and a number beneath it. "Someone has taken an interest in you," he said. "Call when you're ready to change your life." Before she could ask anything, he stepped into his car and disappeared. She almost laughed. She threw the card into her bag and forgot about it, thought maybe he was recruiting for a weird cult. But then strange things began to happen. Her tuition debt wiped clean. The landlord who had threatened eviction now offering to extend her lease for free. Groceries started showing up at her door. Then came the final straw, a package wrapped in black silk, placed neatly at her doorstep. Inside was a brand new phone, untouched. No apps, no browser, just one contact, Mr. Calloway. She stared at it for an entire night. Something deep inside her said, "Don't call." But when the world gives you nothing and someone finally opens a door, you step through no matter what's on the other side. She pressed the contact. "Miss Mokoena," he answered immediately, voice calm and distant. "You've accepted the offer. Good." "I didn't," she started, but he interrupted. "There's a car waiting outside. It's time." That was the last normal moment of her life. She didn't resist when the black car arrived. She didn't ask questions when the men inside offered her a coat far warmer than her own. They didn't touch her. They didn't need to. By the time she realized what was happening, the jet was already in the air. Hours later, she arrived at a mansion that looked like a fortress. Every step echoed through hallways lined with men in suits and women with empty eyes. She was led into a grand room with a burning fireplace and gold-framed art too expensive to name. Then he walked in. Magnus Kane. The man was easily in his 40s, but power clung to him like a second skin. His voice was deep, his eyes unreadable, and when he looked at her, it wasn't like looking at a person. It was like inspecting a product. "You're even more perfect than I expected," he said, circling. Her slowly, Zanele felt her skin crawl. "What is this place? Why am I here?" Mr. Calloway stood silently in the corner, emotionless. "You were sold," Magnus said plainly. "To me?" Zanele's heart dropped. "For what?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Magnus stopped in front of her, close enough for her to smell his cologne, rich, sharp, suffocating. "Your virginity," he said. "I paid a very high price for something no man has touched." Zanele stumbled back as if slapped. "You're lying." "No," he cut in, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Your government handler, your so-called sponsor, they signed you over before you even boarded the plane." Her knees buckled. She clutched the edge of the couch to stay upright. "You were never just a student, Zanele," Magnus added. "You were inventory, and now you're mine." She wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere left to go, and this was only the beginning. Zanele didn't sleep that first night. She sat on the edge of the massive guest bed, if you could call it that, wrapped in a silk robe someone had laid out for her like it was normal. Like she wasn't a girl who had just learned her body had been sold off like a luxury item. The room was warm, too warm, but she couldn't stop shaking. Her phone was gone, her ID, her bags. Everything familiar had been stripped away the moment the plane touched down. Even her clothes had been replaced with something more fitting, a satin nightgown she refused to wear. The worst part? There were no bars on the windows, no locked doors. She could walk out, but where would she go? She was somewhere far from London, somewhere rich and isolated. The estate was surrounded by fences, cameras, and men with earpieces. Even if she ran, she wouldn't make it past the gate. Zanele knew how to fight, but this wasn't the kind of war you could win with fists. Morning came, and with it Mr. Calloway. He entered her room like he owned the air inside it, holding a silver tray with tea and toast. Zanele stared at him with disgust. "I'm not hungry," she muttered. "That's unfortunate," he replied coolly. "Mr. Kane expects you to be well-rested and presentable." "Presentable for what?" she snapped. "For dinner, with him. Tonight." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You people are sick." Calloway didn't react. "He's given you 48 hours. After that, your cooperation will no longer be a request." Zanele stood, trembling with fury. "You sold me like I'm some thing. I'm not merchandise." Calloway met her eyes. "You were bought long before I met you. You just didn't read the fine print." Then he turned and left, as calm as if he were discussing the weather. Zanele paced the room for hours. She tried the doors. None were locked. But the guards at the end of the hall didn't flinch when she stormed past them. They let her wander the mansion. But outside, every window showed the same thing. Walls, cameras, steel gates. She was inside, a golden cage, and the bars were invisible. When evening came, a maid knocked. She didn't speak much English, just nodded toward the closet and said, "Please dress." Inside were dozens of dresses, expensive, elegant, all the wrong size, like someone had guessed what a girl like her should wear. She picked the plainest one, a long black gown with sleeves, and wore it out of spite. Let them choke on her silence. At 7 p.m. sharp, the dining room doors opened. Magnus Kane stood at the head of a table longer than a runway. He wore a grey suit, no tie, and that same cold expression, like he wasn't impressed by anything that breathed. "Sit," he said. Zanele didn't move. "Sit," he repeated. "Calm. Absolute." She sat, jaw clenched. The meal was extravagant. Roasted duck, truffle potatoes, imported wine she didn't touch. She pushed her plate away. Magnus didn't seem surprised. "I don't expect you to enjoy this," he said, slicing his food neatly, "but I do expect you to understand your position." "My position?" she whispered. "I'm a prisoner." "No," he said, dabbing his mouth. "You're an asset. One I paid more for than most men pay for a house." "How you think that makes it okay?" she asked, voice rising. Magnus leaned back. "You should be grateful." "Grateful," she repeated, heart racing. "You were living like an animal. Filthy apartment, no money, eating garbage," he said. "Flatly. Now you're here, fed, safe, untouched. That's more than most women like you get." Zanele stood, fists clenched. "You think safety means ownership, that feeding me gives you the right to touch me." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not yet." Her whole body went cold. "There are rules," he said. "I keep." "My word, you have 2 days, then you come to my room willingly, or things change." Zanele stared at him, disgust burning through her chest. "You're a monster." "No," he said, picking up his wine. "I'm the truth." And just like that, she knew she wasn't in a nightmare. She was in his world now. The walls were closing in. Zanele didn't cry. She wanted to, needed to. But no tears came, just this deep, nauseating pressure in her chest that wouldn't leave. 2 days. That's what Magnus Kane gave her, like it was some twisted countdown to the death of her innocence. She stayed up, the entire night, curled in the corner of her bed, clutching a blanket she didn't recognize. Everything in this place was soft, expensive, luxurious, but none of it felt real. Not to her. The clock ticked too loudly. Every hour closer to the end of her so-called grace period, she had to escape, somehow. The next morning, she demanded to see a phone, a laptop. Anything to contact someone, anyone. Calloway appeared in her doorway holding a white folder. "Your transcript," he said, placing it on the table. Zanele stared. "What?" "Your future," he said without blinking. "A degree, a job." New identity if you cooperate. Her stomach turned. You think I care about a piece of paper when I'm about to be raped? He didn't flinch. You won't be raped. You'll consent, that's the deal. She marched toward him, eyes blazing. Consent under fear isn't consent. Calloway tilted his head, calm as ever. Legally no one will care, but feel free to scream. No one's listening. That's... When she realized no cameras, no phones, no internet, they weren't afraid of exposure. They had power in places the law couldn't touch. And she? She was just one more forgotten girl far from home, sold by a system that never cared. By noon, Zanelli had searched every inch of the guest wing. Locked drawers, fake vents, nothing useful. Every exit she could find was guarded. But then, something strange happened. As she passed a hallway near the west wing, she heard voices. 2 young women whispering behind a cracked door. The moment she moved closer, they went silent. She knocked once. No response. Zanelli pushed the door open slowly. Inside were 2 girls, one blonde, one South Asian, sitting on the edge of a bed, with matching haunted expressions. The room was nearly identical to hers. You're new, the blonde said softly. Zanelli nodded. How long? The brown-skinned girl asked. 2 days, Zanelli whispered. They didn't need to ask more. Their eyes said everything. The blonde motioned her inside and shut the door. My name's Lila, she said. This is Anaya. Zanelli looked between them. How long have you been here? 6 months, Lila said bitterly. They tell you 2 days, then it becomes weeks, then forever. They keep you until they're done with you, Anaya added, or until someone richer makes a better offer. Zanelli's head spun. You mean we're not the only ones? There's at least 10 girls in this house, maybe more in other properties, Lila said. Most come from countries that won't ask questions when they go missing. Zanelli sank into a chair. Why hasn't anyone tried to escape? We have, Anaya whispered. But the ones who try, they don't come back. Ever, Lila said. No one talks about what happens to them. The guards just clean the rooms like they were never here. Zanelli swallowed hard. So we just wait? Anaya looked at her, voice trembling. No. We survive. Until we find the right way out. Zanelli nodded, her body shaking with rage. That night she sat at her vanity, staring into the mirror. The face looking back at her wasn't hers anymore, not the same girl who arrived in London full of hope. This one had fire in her chest and blood in her throat. Magnus wanted her obedience. She would give him a war instead. The next morning Zanelli woke before sunrise, eyes wide open in the dark. There were no dreams here, only calculation. She wasn't going to run, not yet. She was going to watch, listen, pretend. Let them think she was breaking. At breakfast, she sat at the long table alone. Magnus wasn't there. Calloway was. He studied, her like always, waiting for resistance. Zanelli picked up her fork, cut into the fruit plate and ate. Calloway raised an eyebrow. You're adjusting, she smiled with just her lips. You said I had 48 hours. He nodded slowly, suspicious but satisfied. That was the first lie. Zanelli spent the rest of the day playing the role they expected, a confused, tired girl falling into line. She asked for books from the library. She wandered the halls with empty eyes. She even started speaking to one of the housemaids, a quiet woman named Elle who had an accent like hers and never met her gaze. But she didn't stop watching. She counted cameras, studied the shift patterns of the guards, memorized exits, windows, stairwells. Everything was catalogued in her mind, like a prisoner etching escape plans into stone. That night, she returned to Lila and Anaya's room. The air was thick with fear and whispers, but something had changed. Zanelli sat cross-legged on the floor. We're not waiting anymore. Lila frowned. You don't even know what he'll do to you yet. Yes, I do, Zanelli said quietly. And I'm not going to stop it. Anaya stared at her. What are you saying? I'm going to let him think I've accepted it, she said. I want him to trust me. I want him to lower his guard. The room went still. That's suicide, Lila hissed. No, Zanelli said, her voice sharper than glass. That's strategy. For the next 2 days she played the perfect captive. She smiled when she had to. She wore the dresses. She even let one of the stylists apply makeup and do her braids, though it twisted her stomach. She made eye contact with Magnus Kane. She spoke when spoken to. And finally, on the second night, as the clock approached midnight, she did something that nearly killed her inside. She knocked on his door. The guard stepped aside wordlessly, letting her in. The room was too warm. The lights dimmed. A fireplace crackled. Magnus Kane sat at the edge of the bed pouring himself a glass of whiskey. He looked up when he saw her, something dark flickering in his eyes. Desire, ownership, triumph. Whatever it wasn't love. "You came," he said, voice like silk wrapped around poison. Zanelli stepped in slowly. "You said you'd stop if I came." He studied her. "I keep my promises." She walked to the edge of the bed, stood still. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled behind her back. "Then I want to make a new one." He raised a brow. "You don't need to force me," she said, lowering her gaze. "You said I'm valuable, right? I can be more than that. I can be loyal, if you treat me like a person." Magnus Kane set the glass down, stood and approached her like a lion circling prey. He reached out and tilted her chin up with 2 fingers. "I knew you'd come around," he murmured. Zanelle's stomach twisted, but she let her expression stay calm. "This house eats girls alive," she whispered, "but I can survive it." He smiled. "Oh, Zanelle, you'll do more than survive. You'll belong here." She nodded. And in that moment, Magnus Kane believed he had broken her. But Zanelle knew better. She hadn't surrendered. She was loading the first bullet. For the next week, Zanelle became everything Magnus wanted her to be. She sat beside him at dinners like a doll dressed in silence. She nodded at his words, even when they disgusted her. She smiled when his fingers brushed her skin. Though every touch made her soul shrink deeper into a corner she swore she'd dig herself out of one day. Magnus Kane, for all his wealth and darkness, had one weakness: ego. He believed he could shape her. He believed he had. That was her weapon. Zanelle watched everything. The way his staff moved when he entered a room, how the guards relaxed when he was distracted, how he never carried a phone but used a secure landline in his study every night at the same time. She learned the names of his inner circle, memorized the routes they walked, the safe they opened with a thumbprint and a key. Most of all, she learned how untouchable he thought he was. She also learned who to avoid. The other girls, Leela, Anaya, and a few others, were kept separated, but not invisible. Zainel would pass them sometimes in the halls or at lessons with private tutors, Kane brought in to train them, like they were pets preparing for auction. But there was one girl who disturbed her more than the rest: Elizabeth. She was the only one allowed to walk freely in and out of Kane's study. Older, quiet, stunning in that cold European way that made her seem sculpted instead of born. She looked at Zanelle with pity and something else: warning. One afternoon, Zanelle found Elizabeth sitting in the garden alone, sketching with charcoal. On parchment, Zanelle sat across from her without asking. "You know what he is," Elizabeth said, not looking up. "I do," Zanelle replied. "Then you're either braver than the rest of us or much, much more foolish." Zanelle narrowed her eyes. "And what are you?" "A survivor," Elizabeth said. "And I've seen girls try what you're doing. None of them got past step 2. "What's step 2? Zanelle asked. Elizabeth finally looked at her. "Making him believe you love him." Zanelle swallowed, the bitterness catching in her throat. "And step 3? Surviving after he doesn't." That night, Magnus called her into his study instead of his bedroom. She expected it would happen eventually. The room was dark wood and firelight, shelves filled with books no one touched. A decanter sat half full on the table, next to 2 glasses. She noticed the papers already laid out, some stamped with names and numbers. Legal documents, silent witnesses of crimes dressed up in contracts. "I have an offer," he said, pouring 2 glasses but handing her none. Zanelle stood quietly, waiting. "You stay," he said, "not just as my guest but as my companion. I give you protection. education, access, and in return a loyalty. You mean obedience? I mean understanding the world you live in now, he said. You're smart. That's why I chose you. Zanele stepped forward slowly. What happens to the girls who say no? She asked softly. He smirked. They disappear. You don't want to disappear, Zanele. She looked down, then met his eyes again. And if I say yes, you become untouchable. No more fear, no more debt, you become mine. Zanele took the glass from his hand, not to drink, but to hold steady. Then she leaned in close, her voice like silk, her eyes steady. I'll be yours, she whispered. But only if I'm treated like your equal. Magnus chuckled, pleased. You'll learn your place, she smiled. So will you. Later that night, when he was asleep, Zanele slipped out of his room and into the hallway. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked to the study, and for the first time she touched the drawer he always kept locked. It wasn't just filled with papers. It held passports. 10 of them. Names, faces, countries. All different, all girls, all disappeared. She took photos with the hidden device she'd stitched into her bra, an old micro-recorder Lila had given her, left behind by a girl who never made it out. She didn't know what she'd do with the files. Yet. But now she had leverage. Now Magnus Kane had something to lose. Zanele didn't sleep that night. She lay still beside Magnus Kane, his arms slung lazily across her waist, like she was nothing more than a trophy he'd won. But her mind was racing, replaying every image she'd captured, the passports, the fake identities, the signed documents tucked behind locked drawers, girls like her, used, renamed, erased. She had proof now, but proof meant nothing without power, and Magnus still had. All of it. The next morning she made her move. During their usual breakfast, the ritual where she pretended to enjoy eggs she couldn't taste, and tea that burned her throat, Zanele leaned in slightly, her tone casual. I've been thinking about the offer you made, she said. Magnus glanced up, amused. And? If I stay, she said carefully, I want access to the study, to help you. I want to understand the business, be more useful. Magnus set down his fork. His expression didn't change, but the silence spoke volumes. You're bold, he said at last. I like that. Zanele smiled sweetly. I know. He gave a small nod. Fine. I'll let you observe. But don't mistake. Observation for control. Of course not, she said, heart hammering. Later that day he took her into the inner office, a second, more private space behind the main study, guarded by biometric locks and cameras. The room reeked of control. Screens lined the walls, showing footage of every hallway, every entrance, every girl. This was the heart of the operation. Zanele stood quietly, absorbing it all. Magnus walked her through the logistics like it was nothing more than real estate, shipment schedules, wire, transfers, encrypted communications with buyers across the world. Girls were tagged as merchandise, reduced to file names and numbers. What about the ones who fight, she asked. They're handled, he said without blinking. Handled how? Magnus didn't answer. She didn't press. Not yet. Instead, she listened, learned, waited. Over the next 3 days she became his shadow, watched him make deals, flirt with cruelty, and laugh at things no human should laugh at. She met men who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. One of them, a heavy-set man named Gregor, came in from Dubai. He looked at Zanele like she was a new car he wanted to test drive. She's a keeper, Gregor said, licking his teeth. She's mine, Magnus replied without looking up. Zanele felt bile rise in her throat. That night, she found Elizabeth again, this time in the basement where the older girls were sent for obedience conditioning. Zanele pulled her aside when the guards weren't looking. I've got files, she whispered. Proof, photos, names, everything. Elizabeth's eyes widened, but she shook her head. That's not enough. You don't understand. He's protected. The law won't touch him. Then I'll go public, leak it, media, activists. Someone will care. No, Elizabeth said quietly. They won't. Not until someone dies. Zanele froze. What are you saying? I'm saying they've tried this before. The moment you release something, he'll know, and he'll erase you unless someone from the inside is willing to burn with him. You mean someone has to stay? No, Elizabeth said, her voice a whisper of smoke. Someone has to kill him. Zanele's blood ran cold. Murder him, she whispered. It's the only way this ends, Elizabeth said. You want to stop this? Stop him. Zanele walked away in silence. That night, as Magnus wrapped his arms around her and whispered praise into her ear, she stared at the ceiling, thinking of all the girls who had disappeared in silence. She had their names now, their faces. Their blood was already on his hands. The only question was, could she live with putting it on hers too?